So I've been playing Subnautica recently, and there's this really great moment that happens when you've left it just that little bit too late to reach the surface. You'll have been swimming around collecting something for your next upgrade, not really paying attention when you hear this warning.
30 seconds.
Okay, that's 30 seconds until your oxygen tank is empty, and right now you are out in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing that'll save you down here in these depths. No, you need to swim upwards as fast as you can. Now as you begin to kick and claw your way desperately towards salvation, you begin to realise this might be a close run thing, maybe even too close. Moments away from the surface and it inevitably happens. The tank hits zero and your body begins to fail. Lungs burning, energy fading, your vision blackens bit by bit until there's nothing left but darkness. You failed, it's over. And then bam! An explosion of colour and life as you cross the threshold at the last possible moment. It's the Subnautica equivalent of scoring a goal in extra time. It is pure drama, I love it, and it also wasn't meant to be in the game. You see, the original intention had been for the player to die as soon as their screen had turned black, but something in the game's code wasn't working quite right, and players ended up being given just a few moments longer to make it to the top. And of course, like so many developers before them, the creators of Subnautica realized it's not a bug, it's a feature! Now I like that story because it's such a clear example of a game being made better by paying attention to how it's actually being played, and in fact, I think Subnautica is a bit of a case study on that front. Not only was it developed in early access, which usually requires some kind of open dialogue with your audience, but also the team at Unknown Worlds added a button that would fundamentally change how they understood their own game. And it's this one. No, sorry, that was actually jump. It's F8, it's F8. Okay, so I know what you're thinking, Chris, that is a feedback form. I thought this was gonna be something a little sexier, you know, something flashy, and yeah, fair enough, but this actually goes deeper than you might think. As players explore Subnautica, they're able to bring this thumb up in-game whenever they like, letting the developers know what it is that they're thinking about whatever it is that they're up to. Maybe they've seen a nice bit of coral and want to share their enthusiasm for it. Or perhaps they've got more of a question to pose, like the one the team received towards the end of last month, which simply asked, why is fire on the water? Importantly, when a player has finished typing their message and is then ready to send it, they do so by clicking on whichever smiley face best represents their current mood, ranging from, I just found a $5 in my back pocket, all the way to, I've accidentally read a tweet by J.K. Rowling. That ticket that makes its way like a tiny message crammed into a bottle to a server that is not only accessible to Unknown Worlds, but also anyone. Like me, for example. Now there's more than 4 million tickets here, I'm told, which is somewhat intimidating. But what is it that we can learn from all this data? Well, for a start, we know that at least one player had an issue with the water's surface being on fire, right? And I'm gonna hazard a guess and say that probably shouldn't be happening. So let's try searching through all the most recent tickets for the word fire. Ooh, okay, maybe that's not a one-off then. You might want to take a look at that, Subnautica. I think your game's on fire. But you know what, for now, let's forget bug fixing. What if I were to tell you that the team were able to take all of this and have it influence the very design of the game? Earlier on, we described each ticket like a message in a bottle, bobbing along and waiting to be found, but actually, that's not quite right. Instead, try to imagine them like tiny blips on a radar scan. These tickets don't just tell the developers what you're feeling, but also your exact coordinates when you were feeling it. And that ends up being really helpful.
You can say, okay, give me all the feedback tickets that are positive and then build me a heat map out of that. And then we can look at it and then we see, oh, that's interesting. There's like a cluster of people over here that really like this area. What is special about this area?
This here is one of those maps. It's a top-down view of the world of Subnautica, and right away you can see all this activity in the middle, which is where you begin the game in your life pod. But there are also a few trends that you can start to identify as players have drifted in certain directions or sudden pockets of activity, like the one you can see over here. Maps like this have helped Unknown Worlds make some surprising discoveries, like for example, the fact that players were having a really strong reaction to a creature called the Reefback when they first encountered it.
What the hell is that sound?
What the? It turns out just the sight of these behemoth-like creatures floating through the sea can evoke quite a powerful response from players. For some, like me, it's a sense of awe at the scale of them, but for others, that can quickly turn to terror. A friend of mine called Johnny is terrified of whales, not the country, the mammals. And he explained to me once that it's not just that they're massive, which they are.
It's that they're so big they could kill you without realising.
That's how some players feel when they see Subnautica's reefbacks. Which is funny to me because I asked the game's director, Charlie Cleveland, about these creatures, and he told me that he'd pretty much fought tooth and nail to try and stop them from being added to the game. As the person who was also responsible for the studio's purse strings, he thought that big creatures like the reefbacks were going to be too expensive and too difficult to implement, but of course they proved so immediately popular that he had to give in, leading to the eventual creation of the crab squid, sea dragon, and reaper leviathan. And Subnautica is almost certainly a better game because of these massive, massive lads. In fact, Cleveland sometimes jokes that his team ended up making a horror game by mistake. Then there's the Aurora, the hulking wreck of a spacecraft you first see when exiting the life pod at the beginning of the game. If you've played Subnautica today, you'll know there's a whole section of the game in which you board this ship and explore it, but that wasn't the original plan. The game's going to be underwater, thought the team. That ship, no, that's just the set dressing.
If you got close to it, it would be obviously, like it's like walking up to a giant billboard. Like, it would look really cheesy if you got close to it. We just assumed that people would never get close to it. And then immediately people would come out of their escape pod and they would look around on the horizon and they'd see this cool looking ship because it looked cool at that distance. They would dive in and they would just swim towards it. And they just hold down W for like 10 minutes until they're there. And then we're just like, why the hell? Like, why are people doing this? And we knew that we either had to remove it, we had to hide it in fog, we had to, I don't know, desaturate it so you could see it, but you weren't as attracted to it. We tried a few different things, and we eventually came to the conclusion that we should just make it cool.
And so that billboard in the distance would go on to become something much more realised, taking a significant amount of work to get to that point too. Almost everything in Subnautica had originally been designed with being underwater in mind. The player's movement, the creatures you encounter, the game's audio and lighting, all of it. This ended up being a massive undertaking and one the team just wouldn't have done without players so clearly having wanted it. Annie and I have been playing D&D over the last couple of years, and this idea really reminds me of some of my favourite parts of that campaign, specifically when the Dungeon Master has astutely noticed that the party is just vibing with a certain character or location, and so allows them to explore that rather than yanking them away and saying, no, you need to go and speak to the wizard over here. This is the quest I want you to be doing right now. Game Maker's Toolkit recently published a really good video on this topic called The Games That Design Themselves, in which Mark shares a bunch of really good examples of different game developers doing just that, following the fun in their own creations. But should you always listen to your audience? If you watched that episode last year on the Wolfenstein sound effect that needed to be nerfed, you'll have heard one of its developers talk about how players can usually be trusted to tell you how they feel about something in a game, but they can't always be trusted to tell you exactly what it is that's making them feel that way. I asked the team if that rang true for them, and they said during the earlier days of Subnautica, players would actually often ask for a way to fight back against the game's more aggressive creatures. Specifically, they'd ask for guns. That feedback did remind the team that the game probably needed to offer more tools for the player to use while under attack, like the flare, which would distract creatures and buy you enough time to escape, but actually, this was also a moment in which Unknown Worlds needed to draw a line in the sand and say, Subnautica isn't actually ever going to be a game about player-driven violence, even if that is what the players themselves end up asking for. And that might sound pretty surprising to you if you're familiar with their previous work, the sci-fi first-person shooter meets real-time strategy game Natural Selection 2. But from the very get-go with Subnautica, Unknown Worlds decided that this game wasn't going to go down that particular route.
Right around that time, we had the Sandy Hook High School shooting, and we have mass shootings in some form every single day in the US. Sometimes it's only 2 people, sometimes it's 4 people, maybe only 1 person gets killed and 4 people get wounded, but people are shooting up schools and grocery stores and stuff like that every day. And I was so frustrated that that our government was like unwilling to do anything about that. And I knew that I couldn't do much about it, but I did know that we could make a game that wasn't focused on guns. I mean, anyone in games, for the most part, doesn't believe that gun violence, virtual gun violence causes real gun violence. I certainly don't believe that there's any link. But why spend all this time creatively, putting energy into the world where you're focused on something that's not really aligning to who you are?
And so, as useful as feedback can be, there's also something to be said for deciding what it is about the thing you're creating that is non-negotiable for you. With Subnautica, that was guns, amongst a few other things. And by having that core identity to hold on to, you prevent all of your design from being driven by the data. And with Subnautica, there was just so much data.
I think since we started talking, we already got about like 20 feedback tickets. And the game has been released for 2.5 years, right? So it was, at some point we got like a ticket every second.
Right.
Oh, there's more.
I also noticed how different members of the team talked about this system differently. For the lead designer, of course, there was the evolution of Subnautica over the years, and also the very real fact that they could not have afforded to make a game like this without early access and the back and forth with the players that provided. For the lead programmer, there was the excitement about how when this game had issues, when bugs cropped up, they found out about them really quickly, and that motivated the programming team to jump on them and try and get things fixed. But it's worth noting that this way of working with your audience doesn't necessarily fit every kind of creator or even every kind of discipline equally. Take narrative design, for example.
I like being judged on the final product, not on the work in progress. That's hard when you're doing a first draft piece of writing and you're just like, you're just putting in placeholders practically. And you're putting it in this situation, you're putting it out into a game and people are playing it as if it's for them, and it's not really. And then you're getting all this feedback in all sorts of different ways, and it's trying to piece through which bits of feedback to take on and which bits are just responding to this first draft thing that there's nothing I can do about.
And although certain parts of game development can be talked about in sort of binary states like broken and fixed, plenty of what goes into creating a piece of art like Subnautica isn't so black and white.
Because you can't please everyone. And the best things don't please everyone. The best things bother a bunch of people. And that's part of what's great about it.
Listening to Subnautica's players made this a better game. Everyone I've spoken to agrees with that. But listening isn't just about accepting everything that you hear. I suppose that's the other crucial part of this process. It's about learning how and when to interpret what it is that you're being told. That, I think, is the trick. And so that's the story of how just a single button press can fundamentally change how a game gets made. In hindsight, I regret not having spoken with Unknown World's Hugh Jeremy, who pushed to implement the game's feedback system in the first place. I'll include a link in our video description, however, to a great mini talk he did in 2015. It's here that I learned, for example, that the form's smiley faces were actually inspired by going through security at Heathrow Airport. I don't know anyone who's felt inspired about anything while going through that process, so I'd give his work a green smiley face. Anyway, speaking of messages floating along in bottles, we actually found one earlier on while filming at the beach. I'm not joking, look at this. Unfortunately, it wouldn't actually shake out of the bottle, so I just let me cut to, I had to go and sit down and try again. It says, this video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is home to thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles like this one about exploring the deepest parts of the world's oceans, narrated by your man, David Attenborough.
With a state-of-the-art submersible, they descend deep below the surface.
If you use the link found in our video description, you can grab a 26% discount on their annual plan, which works out at $14.79 per year, which is a steal in of itself. But it's even better than just that. There is actually a little bit more at the bottom as well. It says, if you do use that promotion code, you'll also get a free subscription to Nebula. Nebula is a streaming platform home to some of the internet's best educational video creators and people who make games as well. I don't really know how we'd like that. In fact, next month, I'm going to be trying something brand new and talking with the person who made the extremely unsettling opening credits for Netflix's Doc. You'll be able to watch that on Nebula as part of their working title series. If that sounds like something you'd be into, How do they make it? And why is everything so fleshy? I intend to find out. Anyway, thank you for watching this video, and a special thanks to our patrons for funding everything we do and allowing me to purchase this set of flippers as a business expense. Take that, the British government. If you enjoyed this piece, then we did one recently on the MMO called Entropia. I didn't do that video, can you tell? It was Quinn's, and it's one of the most popular things we've had on the channel in ages, and rightly so, so do have a watch of that if you like. And yeah, would anyone like to buy a pair of flippers? They're extremely uncomfortable, and I don't really know what to do with them now. Anyone? They're yellow.